Thank you so much for such a warm welcome. Now you guys know my superpower, my secret, that I'm from all places. And also, please forgive me for my accent. It is terribly confused these days. But like Greg was saying, it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning and to be able to share a message that I think is really relevant to what was already spoken about and obviously to our mission. So I'll talk a little bit more about who we are as an organization, and then we're going to take some time and be looking at a story that perhaps you're familiar with in the book of Esther, and talking about a really pivotal question that I'll put at the forefront of our conversation today. But what do we do in the face of injustice? If you want to go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit about who we are. So for those of you who are not familiar with A21, we are a global anti-human trafficking organization that began nearly 18 years ago. And it all started with a person who was walking through an airport in Thessaloniki, Greece. And on this particular occasion, she was going through, waiting for her bags. I don't know if you've heard of her. Her name is Christine Kane. And as she was waiting for her bags to arrive, she noticed all these posters that said missing. Men, women, and children. And she was absolutely overwhelmed by the amount. And as she was leaving the airport, and she's seeing all of these posters that say missing, 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 she approaches this one particular poster of this young girl, and her name was Sophia. Now, at the time, she had just had her second daughter, and her name is Sophia. And she asked herself this question: what is the difference between that child that is missing and my child that's safe at home? Now, it's so easy to walk past those images and it just be a crowd, just be a sea of faces, to not even realize what's going on. And she shares how she went from just seeing these faces and actually realizing that's somebody's child. And so fast forward, she asked the taxi driver that was picking her up, can you explain to me why there's so many missing posters? And he was quite desensitized, to be fair. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's just this issue called human trafficking. So what are your plans for your trip? Just on to the next thing, like it was no big deal. And I think, unfortunately, like Greg was saying, there are more people enslaved in the world today than at any time in human history. And human trafficking is the crime of contradiction. It is all around us, but it's hidden in plain sight. Contrary to historically what we've understood as slavery, we've honestly probably think of people who are chained in the marketplace. There's something very visual that you can depict in that. But today, in our everyday lives, we have people who are trapped, who are being forced, manipulated, coerced into things that they never wanted to. Whether it be for labor, exploitation, whether it's sex trafficking, whether it's an issue that we see so prevalent in the UK called county lines, where young people are trafficking drugs up and down the United Kingdom. There's so many different ways, but today, again, my focus isn't going to simply be on the issue, but we're going to be talking about this radical hope that we believe that you and I can be part of the solution. And so behind me, we have a mission. It's a three-pronged strategy to reach people with a message of awareness. Because if you don't know what the problem is, how can you do anything about it? So we want to reach people with this message. Secondly, we work with teams across the globe that help recover individuals who have been trafficked. And so this might look like we operate a hotline. We operate a hotline in South Africa, which is really incredible, as well as in Greece, Spain, Bulgaria. We've got teams in Thailand, Cambodia, across the US, Latin America, that help recover individuals who have been trapped in a situation that they never dreamt of in the first place. And then lastly, we have teams that provide aftercare and direct support for those who've come through this horrific cycle of exploitation so that they can regain complete independence. And that is our hope, that people walk and leave our programs with absolute autonomy and freedom. And that's going to be our mission. So I'm really proud to be part of this team and to be sharing a little bit about that. And we're so grateful for your support as a church. I know that many of you have probably supported us in the Walk for Freedom in different aspects. And so it is such a great privilege to be able to share about that. Maybe we'll go to the next slide, just Speaking fab. So yes, we talked a little bit about some of the stats and the figures of what I mentioned, those 50 million people who are estimated to be exploited. 1 in 4 of those individuals is a child. So a little bit about my story. You already know that I'm what we call a third culture kid. I didn't know if you knew that, but that's who I am. Grew up in a really diverse background. My parents were missionaries, they were pastors, so I got to travel Latin America. So I wasn't unfamiliar with the issues of poverty. I wasn't unfamiliar with the issues of exploitation as such, but it was when I was 16 years old, I sat in a school assembly, and for the first time, I heard these 2 young men tell their stories of how they escaped the Rwanda genocide, where they were forced to be child soldiers. And that story, their story, impacted me so much. They were called the Lost Boys. They had to walk across 3 countries to get to safety. And for the first time, as a 16-year-old, it was like my eyes were open to realize what was happening. Why weren't people talking about this? Why was this happening, what seemed like right underneath our noses? And I became so enraged but impassioned with God. What do I do with this? What do I do with the reality of what's happening? But who am I? I'm 16, still in high school. I've got things that I have to accomplish. But you see, even within that moment of feeling almost like hopeless, I felt like the Spirit of God reminded me of the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus talks about this kingdom where it's defined by righteousness, peace, love, and mercy. In this kingdom, God is looking for not only people who are going to look after the orphans and the widows, but he's looking for people who are going to be able to respond to the call the same way Isaiah did and say, "Here I am, Lord, send me." And so we're going to look at the story of an individual who is quite remarkable, in my opinion. She actually is someone, I don't know if you are completely aware of her story, but it's an epic tale of good triumphing over evil in the most unlikely and, if not impossible, circumstances. One might even say God was divinely working in the backdrops of her story to orchestrate a story of justice and liberation for God's people. Now, the book of Esther is quite unique because it is the only book in the Bible that does not mention God. It is also quite unique because the heroine of the story is an orphaned girl, not your stereotypical hero in a Jewish history or context. And here we find this young orphan who's living in exile in the Persian Empire. Again, if in some ways she's almost like she's a refugee in a very politically charged and hostile empire. And yet, she's in a situation where she is likely to be experiencing persecution, where she is likely to be experiencing marginalization, but yet a call for justice comes to her. And she has the opportunity to either try to hide or stand up to that call. Now, telling in her story, obviously, it's about a girl who becomes queen. Now, I don't want to take away all of the thunder of this story, but I'm going to kind of dive a little bit into the backdrop so that we can kind of understand this a little bit more. So right before we kind of get into the story of Israel, who's living in the Persian Empire for nearly 70 years, they're under occupation of this foreign empire. They've been displaced. In some ways, they don't actually know their identity. You know how I said I'm a third culture kid? It's like, are you Canadian? Are you Guatemalan? Are you Ecuadorian? Are you Australian? That's Israel. 70 years away from their homeland. They don't know who they are anymore. Before that, I don't know if you're familiar with the book of Nehemiah, where he goes back to rebuild the temple walls. There's been so much destruction that's happened in Jerusalem. There's this longing for God. When are we going to have that day of liberation? When are we going to see justice restored? When are we going to come back to our homelands? Waiting on that promise. So you guys feel that promise every once in a while? God, when are you going to bring peace to our nation? Today we took a moment of silence to commemorate those who have fallen, but also we look ahead going, God, we need you. We need you to intervene in this injustice that we're seeing. And we live in that tension of the now and the not yet. The now that Jesus said, my kingdom as it is on heaven, let it be on earth. But yet, people are still living in slavery. How is that possible? And so we're trying to reconcile that tension. We're trying to reconcile that we've been given this great commission as the people of God to go into all the earth, to go into all the nations, for every nation, and share his good news. But yet there's just so much. There is so much conflict. There is so much injustice. There is so much brokenness. And God, we want to see your kingdom established, but how do we do it? How do we do it? And so here in this very tension of the now and the not yet, the good news of the kingdom of God, but yet also in the face of injustice, we find the paradox of the book of Esther. The people of God finally receive notice from King Cyrus that they can return to their homeland and rebuild and reestablish. But again, like I said, they've been living away for over 70 years, and this is where Esther starts. Does she stay or does she go? Does she live in this foreign land or does she return to the homeland of her people? Now, fast forward, what happens is Esther actually comes to a position where she is forced to go before the king. She is forced into the king's harem as such because his previous queen, he didn't like her. He didn't like her attitude. She refused to come before him for a feast and a celebration, and she refused to be defiled by his drunken guests. And here is where we find that he calls for all the most beautiful women of the empire to be presented to him because he wants a new queen. Beauty contest. This is survival. For so many of the people that we work with men, women, and children. But their lives is survival. They don't find themselves in their situation where they've been tricked or deceived or coerced because they're not clever, because they don't have dreams and ambitions, or because, it was the easy option. A lot of times it's survival. It's survival for a parent that would willingly say, yes, take my child to another city. Yes, hopefully they could have an opportunity at a better education, not knowing that that person that they've entrusted their child with does not have good intentions. It happens over and over again. The most common form of exploitation that we see is labor exploitation here in the UK. And it's UK nationals make up the top 3% of those individuals. It's not just people who are coming from overseas. It's people here who are living in the tension of the rising cost of living, that just need to put food on the table. Yeah, don't worry, you know what, you can work these hours and we'll cover this for you and we'll cover your food and your accommodation. It's too good to be true. And they don't realize that that's just it. It's too good to be true. And so we see the story continue to unfold of survival. The story of her remaining faithful to, all right, my cousin has told me to not tell anybody that I'm a Jew in case that stirs up more conflict. And for whatever reason, again, maybe it's a little bit of that divine serendipity happening in the background, Esther seems to be gaining favor amongst the palace and the king's eunuch. In chapter 2, verse 18 or verse 15, it says, when it was the turn for Esther to go before the king, she asked for nothing other than the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem and what he suggested. And Esther won favor of everyone who saw her. And that day, for whatever reason, amongst the most beautiful women of the entire empire, Esther pleased the king, and that day she became queen. I say this all to kind of set up the backdrop of what is really far from a fairy tale. We could almost close this story right there and be like, wow, she became queen. Amazing, right? No, this is just the beginning. There's so much more. And so as the story continues to unfold, we learn some things that's happening in this empire. There is this struggle for power. There's this struggle for status. And in the backdrop, there's this long-lasting blood feud between Haman, the Agagite, and the Jews that ultimately leads to a decree to annihilate every Jew across the entire empire. And this is where we come to some, maybe these famous words that you're familiar with. So if we read from chapter 4, it goes like this. When Mordecai learnt of all that had been done, he tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth and ashes and went into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate. Fast forward, there was great mourning amongst the Jews, fasting and weeping and wailing. Verse 4, when Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned the head king's eunuch and assigned to attend her and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai. Verse 7, Mordecai told him everything. The edict, the amount of money that was paid into the treasury, everything that was instructed about the Jews' annihilation. And then he instructed her to go to the king and to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So here we have Esther. She's living in this palace. She's queen. Her cousin, he's in the city streets. He's wailing. He's crying. He's got ashes on his face. And she's like, what's going on? Is Mordecai having a bad day? That's weird. So here's some observations that I've made. Esther's initial response in seeing Mordecai wailing in the streets, his clothes torn, his ashes over his face, is to send him new clothes. Oh, you had a bad day. Some retail therapy, that'll fix it. Here's some new clothes. Come on, get on with it. All the Jews were in mourning, and she had no idea. For so many of us, and I put my hand up to this, we have no idea what's taking place locally and across the globe. We have no idea. It's out of sight and it's out of mind. I know for the first time that when I became aware of this crime, that children were being taken from their families, that they were being manipulated, coerced, forced into war, forced to do horrible things. I was so shocked that no one had told me this before. And when we talk about this crime, I know it's really not pleasant. Who wants to talk about slavery? Who wants to talk about human trafficking? But perhaps the Spirit of the Lord is telling us who has eyes to see, who has ears to hear, who has a heart to respond to this. And I get it, like Esther. She wasn't exposed to it. She was so far removed from the problem that she had no idea. But I also would love to encourage us that perhaps this is a space where we can be moved with compassion instead of overwhelmed with compassion fatigue. The point isn't to feel hopeless or bad or to be like, oh, I should do more. But the point is to look up and notice those who are in our community, who are in need. To ask questions and follow up questions. To not just maybe send a quick, oh, here's a pair of new clothes, get on with your day. But maybe ask what's really going on in a deeper way. The next observation that I make, Mordecai comes back with a report about this horrible injustice that's taking place and instructs Esther that she must go to her husband, the king, and beg for mercy to save her people. And at this very point, you have to understand, Esther has not been before her husband, the king, for over 30 days. And if she goes before him unannounced, she will surely die. That is the law. So she is torn by the danger and the complexity of this issue. Either she goes to her husband and dies, or she stays silent and her people die. And she likely dies. What does she do in that tension? For many of those who are caught in the cycle of human trafficking, there is no direct way out. It's not a quick just leave. It's a cyclical problem. It's complex. There's need for direct intervention and ongoing support. For so many people who even call out for help, it takes at least 4 other attempts for them to actually make the steps to seek support and leave their traffickers. It's a complex issue. It requires time, commitment, resources, staff. And we might look at the 50 million people and say it's hopeless. Nothing can be done. It's the fastest form of organized crime. What can I do? But just like Esther, this situation may appear impossible or hopeless. However, let me tell you the story of Maria, this young girl who is exploited and trafficked. And one day, for whatever reason, she decided to muster up the courage to try to run away. And she left. And she collided with a woman. And she told this woman all the horrible things that had happened to her. And that woman was like, she had one of our leaflets. I don't have one directly with me, but a leaflet that looked like this on her. She's like, I know what you're talking about. She called the helpline. And because that person knew about her situation, they were able to help Maria get to safety. Another story I want to tell you that happened just 2 years ago. There was these women that were being dropped off at this really interesting location. And this neighbor noticed there's different women that are coming to this location every day, getting dropped off. Seems a bit odd to me. Just noticed. You might call her a busybody. Just noticed. After a couple days of this, she calls our hotline and says, I'm noticing these women who are being dropped off by this person. And there's different women every single time. That call to our hotline in Greece led to 52 women being rescued from an underground trafficking ring. The simplicity of just, I saw something and I said something, and I noticed something that just wasn't right. And so just like Esther, she was in an impossible situation. The impossibility of this justice, but maybe just God is working in the details, in the background. Another observation, Mordecai then reminds Esther, and these are these famous words that I know that we often love to quote. Verse 13, do you think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than any of these other Jews? For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews, even if it is from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have come to this position, this time, this place, this palace, this kingdom, for such a time as this. Mordecai then reminds Esther that perhaps her position, her place in the palace, is not just a seeming unrelated series of coincidences. Maybe God has actually been orchestrating this all along in the first place. And here's a bit of a spoiler alert. Esther then is mobilized into action. She goes from just being a spectator, far removed from what's going on, far removed from the injustice, living in the palace in the safety of her courts and the people who are attending her, and she is mobilized to action, and she calls for a fast. And she calls for all of her people, all of the Jews, to fast for 3 days as she prepares to go before the king. And she says these famous words that if I perish, I perish. So I started today with the questions, what are we going to do in the face of injustice? Are we going to remove ourselves, distance ourselves? Oh, it's just too messy and complicated. It's too dangerous. It's too overwhelming. Are we going to have eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to move? I recognize that many of you, and myself included, we come from such a diverse background. You've got your own lived experience. You have your own understanding of injustice and heartbreak. You have your own understanding of what might seem like an obstacle that's too insurmountable for you to even face. And you yourself are seeking God in prayer and fasting and wanting that intervention. And I totally get it. I'm with you. We're living in that tension of a kingdom that's not yet and still to come. And we're hopeful for that. But I also want to encourage you, just like I told you Chris's story, it just started with somebody who saw a poster and was like, all right, I need to do something about this. I need to tell my entire community. I need to tell my church. I wonder who doesn't know about this just like I didn't know. Or maybe my story is this 16-year-old who was like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to do with this problem, but I can start a prayer group. You know, so many people who volunteer with A21, same situation. I don't know what to do with this, but I can rally my community together. We can do a walk. We can host an event. We can fundraise. We can tell people that this is a problem that's taking place, but there's something that we can do about it. And this is my encouragement for us today. we've got this one quote that we love to share, and this is something that Chris has said to us over and over again. No one person can do everything, but we can all do something. And so I ask and I leave us with this today. What is your something? Now, perhaps you're not going to have to stop a genocide like Esther. Perhaps you're not going to position yourself in such a dangerous situation. I hope that's not the case. But we can all do something. And after this, I'm going to be around, so if you have any questions or you want to chat about anything, please approach me. There's so many ways that you can get involved, whether it is through giving, whether it's, hosting an event. We have our Global Freedom Summit. We have so many resources that I brought with me today. But I will ask you as the church, will you commit to praying? Will you commit to standing in the gap in this space of injustice? Will you commit to supporting our work so that we can see every man, woman, and child free? Thank you so much.